Morning, ladies and gentlemen. We are happy to welcome you on the second day of the 15th South Eastern Europe Energy Dialogue. After a fruitful yesterday session, I am honored to moderate this panel where we're going to discuss about the East Med energy options. We have with us Mr. Kostis Stamboulis, Mr. Kostis Economopoulos, which is a petroleum geoscientist research fellow at IENE, and will present the main study. And Mr. John Roberts will finish with his very insightful comments from his vast experience in the field. What I can say as a moderator is that East Med is an area that offers many options actually for energy. We can, let's say, separate it in four pillars as of production, transportation and export, regional integration and trading, and efficiency and sustainability. It's not that I have some insights in the study. We're going to see it presented by Mr. Economopoulos. However, I can say that for production, and because East Med is in the crossroads of actually three continents, Europe, Asia, and Africa, it's an area when there is a lot of potential for natural gas production, oil exportation, renewables, of course. We have seen Greece develops hugely in renewables, potential hydrogen, and even nuclear energy. We saw in the previous conference that I attended by IENE in Romania that there are also some low impact nuclear energy solutions that can be useful. For transportation, we have seen LNG terminals especially in Greece, and we're waiting for the start of the LNG terminal in Alexandroupolis. And finally, we should discuss about how this, it's good to produce energy, to transport energy, but it's more useful to be able to sustain energy. Because after all, energy is something that we need to move the world. And saying that, I will pass the floor to Mr. Stamboulis for his presentation.
Thank you, George, for the introduction. And I'd like to say a few introductory words about this study, which we are currently conducting, and it's more or less completed. So that's why we decided to broach the subject with today's audience here, seeking your views, a wider discussion, and also to make you aware of some work that has been going on for the last few months at the Institute, and hopefully will produce some very, very interesting results. So, energy options in the East Mediterranean. Can I have the first slide? How is it? As you'll see from the outline of the study, we try to cover the whole region of the East Mediterranean, which in part covers Southeast Europe, and the other one is, of course, Middle East, is East Mediterranean proper. A lot of discussion has been going on lately over the last 2 decades on the importance of East Mediterranean in terms of hydrocarbon resources and how this could be exploited and could even provide a basis for future European energy to satisfy European energy demand. We have seen a lot of activity going on around Israel. Israel started. Egypt started, of course, back in the 60s. Then Israel, which was the big surprise in the area. Then Cyprus. Greece apparently is preparing, getting ready. Lebanon has entered following an agreement with Israel on delineation of their EZ. Um, and um, Egypt is of course advancing on early successes, producing quite a lot of gas. But of course, Egypt, as you'll hear later, has a big problem in terms of its own very high demand. But as we're trying to point out in this study, hydrocarbons is not enough. We should look further into electricity, renewables, hydrogen, and see how all these different parameters can be brought together so we begin to have a holistic view of what East Med can actually offer. I mean, what are the energy options of the whole East Med, not just oil and gas? And in this sense, we carried out our work. It's not a modeling work. It's quite a lot of descriptive work and analytical work, trying to bring facts which have not been discussed or exposed enough until now. And on the basis of these facts, build a picture of the whole dynamic of East Med in terms of energy. The question is, can East Med become a major energy producer enough to have energy to export to its surroundings, or will it produce just enough energy to cover its own needs, which is fair enough. I mean, it would be great because it will help in the overall energy balance. And of course, there are several historical reasons and social reasons why we're focusing on the East Mediterranean. The cradle of Western civilization, the birthplace of cross-border trade since ancient times. The three main religions, Judaism, Christianity, Islam, meet here in the East Mediterranean since very early. And a lot of civilizations, several civilizations have grown around the East Mediterranean, each one on its own right, but with a lot of cross-border trade and influences being exchanged. And as David Abulafia, in his very seminal work on the Great Sea, says, its opposing source, that is the Mediterranean's opposing source, are close enough to permit easy contact, but far enough apart to allow societies to develop distinctly under the influence of the hinterland, as well as one of one another. So in today's interconnected digital world, natural and religious barriers have not eclipsed. And we see this in the Middle East wars of the last 75 years and the current war conflict in Israel-Gaza, and how this is in danger of spreading in the surrounding wider Middle East area, but also affecting East Med. However, this extended region may still provide answers to today's quest for new energy supplies and transformative technologies to help meet not only its own needs, as I said earlier, but also support energy demand in Europe. As in the past, even today, this Mediterranean can be understood in terms of control of key energy routes across the sea. And this is especially important in the case of energy, whether oil, gas, or electricity. And last observation is that because of this development, very huge developments in oil and gas in the East Med over the last few years, with electricity coming in now through, as you'll hear later in the presentation, of very bold projects in terms of electricity interconnections, we begin to see the formation of an East-Med energy trade, whether this is in LNG, whether this is in electricity. To allow this trade to prosper, obviously the interconnections are very important. And I think over the next 10, 15 years, we're going to see a lot more work and emphasis on interconnections, whether these are electricity, gas, trade through LNG, and hydrogen coming up soon. So I now pass the floor to Kostis Economopoulos, who was the main author and the person who is fully involved in this study. So Kostis, you have the floor.
So we're going from one Kostis to another Kostis. Just to grab the opportunity to say that these infrastructure projects sometimes are quite difficult to accomplish, and we are also building the EastMed gas pipeline that will connect Israel, Cyprus, Greece, and potentially Italy. It's a huge project. Hopefully, we're going to see it based on the demand. So, Kostis, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Mr. Saltes. The introduction has been already made. I'd like to thank you all for being here. I'm very happy to be here presenting this study. I will start off, sort of continue from the previous slide with the geopolitical importance of the area. As it was mentioned, it lays right at the crossroads between the Middle East, North Africa, and Europe. We see the circle; it's literally like a cross sign there. It's at the same time it's a choke point and a gateway. We have seen this with latest developments in the Gulf of Suez, in the areas with Houthi attacks. And it's a gateway towards the East Mediterranean, from there to the West and Atlantic area, etc. At the time being, it's right in between two conflicts in the Middle East and for the last 2 years in Ukraine. It's very close to major international energy producers like Saudi Arabia, Iraq, Iran, which would be like peripheral countries towards the East Med. And it has the potential of becoming a major energy supplier to Europe itself. We have prolific hydrocarbon developments and fields in the area. The renewable potential is quite high. And then you have Europe right next door, which is an energy-thirsty continent. But we're facing an area where it's got diverse demographics, politics, policy, and economies. Countries such as Greece, Cyprus, and Israel are considered developed. Others are emerging. Greece and Cyprus are part of the EU. The rest of the countries are not. There is political tensions between those countries, but every player in the area considers energy as a tool towards peace and prosperity and general regional cooperation. You can see on the graph how the GDP of all these countries has been developed over the last years. We see quite a lot of fluctuations. Greece and Cyprus have already bounced back from recent economic crisis. And so we're talking about a very diverse system of countries and societies. I'll start off with the energy itself, but by oil and gas, and I've split those the countries into two groups, having a stronger position, and others having a weaker position. I consider a strong position for Israel, Turkey, and Egypt. Especially Israel has been a rising star the last few years with its gas production. It's becoming a Chicago. And we have Egypt, which has always been an oil and gas producer, regardless of the fact that its gas production has been dropped by almost 11% last year. We have we have 83 wells drilled in 2023 in Egypt, and we had 65 new discoveries last year in Egypt. And then we have Turkey on the other side, which has at the as we speak almost 350, or just about 350 active licenses running. Production, and over 170 drills drilled in 2021 and 150 in 2020. These are quite big numbers in the oil and gas industry. And then we have Cyprus, which perhaps is not having its own oil and gas production at the moment, but it has done huge steps towards that in the last few years. We have several discoveries after Aphrodite in 2011. Which is still, its development is still pending, but it's considered a strong position held country. On the other hand, we have Greece, Lebanon, and Syria. Syria has always been an oil and gas player in the world, but with the war in Syria, things have been completely different, with gas production down to over 70%, and gas production over 50%, oil production over 70% in the last 10 years. And the command of the oil and gas infrastructure is difficult to determine. On the other hand, Greece has been left behind a little bit with regards to oil and gas exploration and production. There were a few notable steps in the last 10 years or so. However, the last 4 or 5 years, there has been a bit of a shift towards other energy resources. So the oil and gas activities have been slowed down. However, indeed, last 2 years we had seismic surveys being taking place in offshore Greece, and hopefully, if all things will be all right with their interpretation and the way the data will be held, Exxon is expected to drill their first exploration well towards the end of 2025, early 2026, offshore Crete. In Lebanon, although the country is taking a lot of steps towards oil and gas exploration and production, it hasn't been very successful. A third licensing round is underway, and they haven't. No commercial commodities have been found just yet. Hopefully, in the near future. Regarding supply and demand, oil. Starting off with oil, Egypt is the main oil producer in the region, and Turkey is following. However, this production, either by Egypt, certainly by Turkey, is not enough. So the region is a net oil importer, and probably it will remain like this. However, on the gas side, Egypt has been up until 2003, supply and demand were moved in step. However, production increased, but declined as of last year, especially with the summer demand, and all the LNG exports have been halted. So the balance has been achieved with imports from Israel in 2023 were about 8.7 BCM. If Egypt keeps on follows this trajectory, it's unlikely that the MOU between EU and Egypt signed in June 2022 will be fulfilled, at least in the near future. Israel, it is last few years a major gas producer in the area, and have been exporting to Egypt and Jordan. However, Israel is not directly linked to the international gas market, and there's two ways to change that: either by a pipeline, the East Med pipeline, just briefly mentioned by Mr. Sattles, or via Egypt from LNG plants. We see that the last 4 or 5 years, gas exports have been increased dramatically. It's the blue column on the top left corner diagram. So, regarding gas transmission in the area, we have the vertical corridor, gas corridor, which was mentioned quite in detail yesterday, and was given credible notice by Mrs. Zduku on yesterday's address to our conference. The importance of this vertical corridor was very well structured. We've been seeing the last few years even more activities regarding the projects and LNG plants and developments and project proposals regarding this expanded gas corridor. Excuse me. Of course, one of the major projects still in underway and designing and all is the East Med. I think currently they've been doing the market tests. Hopefully, this pipeline will come in place at some point, and this will be a very good link from the East Med towards gas-thirsty Europe. Moving on to electricity now. The first bullet point: supplying of uninterrupted and competitive priced electricity in the regions of utmost importance for their survival and economic development is the major importance in the area. And power generation should be is achieved through either indigenous sources or imported. It was mentioned yesterday from a presentation. I don't really recall who did that, talking about indigenous exploitation of indigenous sources, and this is one of the major issues here. A big challenge for the East Med electricity is still the increase of power generation from the local sources. We see it in pretty much all the countries in the region. The generation capability increases as the level of the country increases at the same time, and we see advance in electrification. And that takes us to the next step, which is the cross-border interconnections being very much in need. It's a major thing in the area, the cross-border interconnections. So we have a number of electricity interconnections, such as the Great Sea Interconnector, the Gregi, and Green Aegean was briefly mentioned yesterday, that are underway in the area, trying to make this a regional grid, the East Med becoming a regional electricity grid. And then you also have some other countries in the neighborhood, such as Saudi Arabia and Jordan. And these are they can be potentially power generators that can export their electricity to East Med and from then on. What's the electricity capacity? This is a snapshot from 2022. Numbers have been increased a bit over the last couple of years. This from the EIA, the US EIA. I'm not going to stay on this slide longer. Just wanted to give you a small review of the installed electricity capacity in the area, quite diverse, of course. And coming to the electricity interconnections themselves, we have an array of projects regarding interconnections, such as, which is the most important at the time being, the Great Sea Interconnection, which took over from the Euro-Asia interconnector last December with a capacity of 1 gigawatt. Then we have the Gregi interconnector, a 3 gigawatt interconnection between Greece and Egypt. And what's important in that is that last March, in March 2024, it was specifically mentioned in the joint declaration on the strategic and comprehensive partnership between the EU and Egypt. Although there was no reference to gas in that declaration or any other source of energy, it was just energy in general. It was specifically mentioned, Gregi was specifically mentioned in this statement. You have the establishment of the special purpose of the Saudi-Greek interconnection. Again, Mrs. Zuku mentioned this yesterday. And there's also an interconnector, the Euro-Gulf interconnector, which is a proposed project of a 2 gigawatt capacity between Egypt and Saudi Arabia. And we have the Green Aegean interconnector and a 9 gigawatt interconnector from Greece directly to Europe across the Adriatic Sea. So we see there's a lot of projects underway, as mentioned by Mr. Stambulis before. And coming into renewables, last few years, there's been an increasing important role in the region. On the left side, we see the average wind speed in the area. In the Aegean Sea, we see the highest wind speeds in the region. And on the right-hand side, we see the photovoltaic power output map. Both of these sources are quite prolific in the area. Ergo, there is some ambitious targets have been set by Greece, Turkey, pretty much all the countries. If I'm not mistaken, Mrs. Zoku mentioned yesterday the target is about 80% of power generation for Greece to be produced by renewables by 2030. So these are really ambitious targets. When it comes to geothermal energy, it's another sort of neglected renewable resource. Turkey is a rising star. It's ranked 4th in the world, behind US, Philippines, and Indonesia. I don't remember the other three, but definitely it's quite a record. Israel is aiming for 30% of the IRS by 2030. It was less than 7% in 2020, so this is a quite ambitious target. And also, Egypt is aiming for over 30% of RES in the energy mix by 2035. So we see. Also, regarding targets, there is a bit of a diversity in the targets themselves. Greece having pretty much the highest, followed by Turkey, and then the rest of the region countries. Hydrogen. This is also briefly discussed yesterday. There is an EU hydrogen strategy, but the difficulties, the cost of hydrogen, and although it's in the core agenda of the EU energy policy, and it's in the agenda of pretty much all the countries in the region, it's still yet to evolve into more substantial projects, more substantial proposals. So this thing will probably take more time to evolve and get off the ground. So coming into energy security, and John Roberts will delve into that in more detail afterwards. We have external threats, instability. We have the Russian-Ukraine war, which is not far from the region. We have regional dynamics. We have conflicts between Israel and Palestinians. We have Turkey-Greece tensions. Although they have minimal direct impact on the energy projects at the time being. And then we have Israel-Egypt gas relationship, which is important for the energy stability in the area. And we have disruptions. We've got sanctions. We have sanctions on Russian LNGs. We have Ukraine conflicts. We have the EU uh, gas supply agreements, the MOUs, Azerbaijan. All these. There's so many things in a very small area happening. And then we have impact from prolonged conflicts in Gaza and the relations of Turkey, the development of the Gaza marine gas fields. There is a lot of things going on in the East Med regarding energy security parameters that one must take into consideration. And then we have Iran on itself and its aspirations to expand, having an expanded role in the region. The axis of resistance, Hamas, Hezbollah, Houthis, they're gaining ground in the area. And even if the conflict in Gaza and Hamas eventually capitulate, Iran's expansionist plans will not stop there. There will always be a constant danger in the region and overflowing hostilities in the region. And there is a geopolitical impact from from Iran's current policies in the region. So can this negative situation be contained, and to what extent? And there's another question: can Iran become a nuclear power? Because if Iran becomes a nuclear power, then a lot of these things will have to be put back to the drawing board, and everything has to be redesigned. Coming towards the end of my presentation, I have a couple of slides for the key messages from today's talk. And so the first thing we have to understand is understand the geography of the region and its paramount importance. We have major energy producers. Saudi Arabia mentioned. We have Iran. The situation. We have Iraq. We have the Gulf of Suez, we've got the Caspian Sea, we've got the Black Sea, and we have the European Union, all these things in a very small geographical area. Can this area become an energy exporter to Europe? We've got the prolific resources, the hydrocarbons, we have a higher renewables potential. But can this all cover regional demand? And can this actually, can the surplus be exported? For example, we have lately Egypt has, as we've seen, decreased its gas production and stopped LNG exports. Will that continue? Not. Greece has been left behind regarding ENP. Will it pick up? Will we have successful exploration wells in the near future? And how this whole thing will affect the supply-demand in dynamics? And we've got electrification. Can the region grids support the energy transition? If not, what must be done? And can the cross-border electricity interconnectors accelerate this energy transition? There's so many questions to be answered. And coming to a second key messages slide, we have all that. Where does Saudi Arabia fit in the picture? Can it export electricity via Egypt? Can it also export via Jordan? And what about Iran, Iraq? How are these two countries fitting the picture? We've got different cultures, as we mentioned. We've got diverse economies. We've got never-ending hostilities. Can this change towards a more unified and even environment? And then we have Turkey on its own. Turkey has been seen to drift away from the West, sort of thing. Can it return? We see that there's been Turkish BRICS discussions and thoughts of Turkey becoming a member of the BRICS. Will that change? Will that go on? And how is that going to affect the area? We've got Turkey and Iran relations, and that has affected U.S. Turkish relations. We've got Cyprus-Turkey, we've got Greece-Turkey relations. These are never-ending relations, hostility sort of difficult relations. And then we've got Turkey, which is unwilling to follow the UN clause. But in reality, can there be any regional cooperation without Turkey? Yeah, there is a big state in the area. We have to consider that. So having said all that, in reality, there's more questions than answers, and this is the main key message from my presentation. And with that, I want to thank you all for your attention, and thanks for being here.
So thank you so much, Coach Sist. I believe that this was not so easy to digest, a lot of messages, a lot of fields. So I connected Kostis to Kostis. Now we'll connect Kostis to John. Just a small remark that, John is from the South Scotland. Me and Kostis, we have both studied in Scotland. So there is a link there. So John, the floor is yours to give us your insights on this delightful presentation.
Good morning. It's an auspicious day today because it's the day that my favorite publication comes out each year, which is the Statistical Review of World Energy for the previous year. And regrettably, this year's edition has some grim reading. First of all, carbon emissions record high, more than 40 gigatons, up 2% in last year. Then we have fossil fuel, record production of oil, 2023, record production of oil and coal, both of them in 2023. But gas, essentially static. So the least polluting of the fossil fuels is the one that has grown least. Now, in part, that's due to some good news about Europe, which has somehow managed in the last couple of years to cut its gas consumption by 60 BCM. Although admittedly, you have to accept that this was forced on it by Russia. But that has had an impact. The impact is not nearly as great as one might expect. Why is it that renewables are currently only 18.5% of total primary energy? Why is the consumption of fossil fuels under current circumstances so stubbornly high? All of this has an impact on this particular region. Why? Because let's take a good look at the regional energy balance in gas. What is the key issue? The core issue is very simple. It's the relationship between Israel and Egypt. In theory, the idea is simple. Gas in the East Mediterranean goes to the liquefaction plants like Idku and Damietta, and then gets transformed into LNG. Except that, as we know, Egypt has stopped producing LNG. Why? Because in 2022, Egypt had a net surplus approaching 4 BCM, but in 2023, it had a net deficit of more than 3 BCM. I've got the figures, I just tried to remember what they were. The issue is that Egypt is no longer in a position to act as an exporter. That was why the mention was that the MOU with the EU on Egyptian supplies is, I think one can safely say, a dead letter. But it has profound implications. If you are Cyprus, what is your logical method of getting your gas from your newly discovered fields to market? Well, the logical argument used to be, well, you ship it to Egypt. After all, it's the nearest point, and your fields are close to the Egyptian gas gathering systems. Plug them in. It makes sense. But it doesn't make sense if Egypt itself is not an open market. We have seen the issue of open markets played out in Turkey for the last 20 years since gas reforms were declared but not implemented that might have made Turkey into a genuine trading hub. But how can you do that if you have companies, usually state companies, that are required to sell gas at subsidized prices? It takes an awful long time to get over the subsidy hump. And you cannot, in Egypt, imagine any situation in which any government in Egypt can hope to survive if it curtails subsidies for gas. So Egypt becomes a pool sucking in gas from its neighbours, for which, in the end, they cannot automatically expect to get global prices. That may eventually come to an end as Egypt steps up its own production of renewables. But that is not going to be soon. So if you take out the main driver of East Med energy production, what are you left with? Very little. You're left with stranded assets again. You're left with the concept of, do you want to go to something like floating LNG? Which brings us to the next energy security issue that confronts Israel. Not just the war in Gaza, but the risk of war with Lebanon and the permanent possibility of a second or a third intifada in the West Bank. The issue here is the instability of that corner of the Eastern Mediterranean makes it extraordinarily difficult to work out what is a rational route for energy development. For Cyprus, I would say the actual answer is very simple. Swallow your pride. Just build a pipeline straight to Cyprus. Use as much gas as you can locally, and then think what you can do next if conditions improve in the next couple of years. Not a big, gigantic answer, but it might help them a little bit. And that's maybe the point. We need to be thinking much smaller. I don't see any real prospect under current circumstances for an East Med gas pipeline. There may, however, be slightly better prospects for electric connections. Is it possible that they are less vulnerable in energy security terms? Or are they as vulnerable, not because of conventional attack, but because all pipelines, all electricity lines are vulnerable to cyber attacks? In other words, interconnections are becoming increasingly difficult. But this is a very peculiar world. In the last 3 years, the amount of oil, coal, and gas traded internationally has grown phenomenally. It's grown by 53%, despite everything we've gone through. COVID and the Russian-Ukraine war and its energy consequences. We are in a more interconnected world than we have ever been. And that makes us a more vulnerable world than we have ever been. The logical way out of that, increased subsidiarity, increased distribution of energy systems, largely reliant on renewables with production centers closer to consumers. But if our progress is so slow, and yet there are signs of hope. Yes, coal and oil production's at record highs, but the speed, the acceleration of renewables is much greater. The trouble is that it's had only limited effect. In total, it took renewables up from 18 to 18.5% of the total primary energy production last year. It's low, and it needs to be much greater, much faster. What are the other energy security issues here? We have the Azerbaijan Memorandum of Understanding with the European Union from July 22. I have peculiar feelings about this. When I look at it logically, I don't see how it can be implemented in full by Azerbaijan alone. Not because Azerbaijan doesn't want to, and not because it doesn't have the resources. It certainly does have the resource base. But the practical difficulty of developing its own gas resources in order to increase its exports from the base level that they use of 10 BCM, which is in fact already 12 BCM, up to 20 BCM, is difficult because the fields that they need to use to get such production levels, namely Shah Deniz and deep level gas from ACG, are very complex and will require many years to reach the required level of production. Other smaller fields will contribute, but not in time to meet the supposed 2027 deadline. I reckon they'll probably get about halfway there. Then in 2027, Azerbaijani gas exports will be up about 5 BCM. But little technical problems. Azerbaijan also needs gas for domestic development and is short of gas for domestic development because its big fields are earmarked contractually for export. But why do I feel that I'm not totally despairing? Well, the answer of that is quite simple. If you don't think in terms of BCM, but perhaps in terms of joules, there's the possibility of electricity export. There's the possibility of renewables coming into play. And Azerbaijan has some very ambitious programs for energy development based on wind, solar, and particular on the offshore wind prospects of the Caspian. The problem here is we don't know what they're doing in terms of boosting their own internal grid. And we are not sure of the viability commercially of a deep sea pipeline under the Black Sea that would enable them to go via Georgia to Romania and then to Central Europe. Expensive project, technically doable, but we don't know whether the finance is available, and we don't know what the commercial results will be. So there is hope and there is doubt. And that, I think, is the situation that you've always had in the Eastern Mediterranean. If you look at the core element that has worried people for decades, if not centuries, if not millennia, the relationship on both sides of the Aegean. 2 or 3 years ago, it seemed to be pretty grim. But there's been much less bombast on either side, whether in Athens or Turkey, Ankara, in the last year or two. It's as if the Ukraine war has had an impact that says, actually, it's best to calm things down. And in this regard, perhaps the greatest piece of luck was Turkey's discovery of the Sakarya field in the Black Sea, switching its attention from prospects that might have helped Cyprus, both north and south, to prospects that would directly help Turkey itself. But again, doubt creeps in. Sakarya is not progressing as well as it should. In part, that appears to be a question of the form of development that was taken with hiring Western companies, international companies, under service contracts, rather than giving them an actual stake in the production. But nonetheless, if Sakarya can overcome its current problems, it is a significant major field. And it starts to ease Turkey's own domestic supply balance very considerably. And if you add to that Turkey's enormous renewable potential, not just geothermal, but I come from Scotland, and we reckon we have the best prospect for wind power in the whole of Europe. But Turkey comes number 2. There's a lot of really good prospects. And those prospects can contribute to regional energy security. And I think that if there is one good prospect that's coming up, it's increasing integration of regional electricity networks in Southeast Europe. And I think that's a positive thought to dwell upon, and I think I'll end there. Thank you.
Thank you so much, John, for your insights and questions that you posed. It was very interesting to see that you mentioned that they were increasing the use of fossil fuels in general for the last 3 years. What I can say as we're reaching the end of this session is that the key messages are the relationship between the countries in the East Med. That is an issue that goes for ages, as well as the interconnection. I can briefly refer to an example. Back in 2013 in Cyprus, there was a problem with a thermal electricity plant that almost made the country to go default. So it's very important to have all these interconnections, so for all the economies to be able to work as they should. Saying that, I will I will have another 5 minutes for questions. So anyone of the audience that wishes to pose a question? Yes, sir.
Thank you very much, Slavko Nekov, again from Bulgaria. I have one principal question to Kostis, any one of the Kostis who decides to answer. It's about the gas storage facilities, the underground gas storage facilities set in the region. Was this dealt in the study in any way? No, you have not discussed this issue at all, because I didn't hear anything, and I think it's an important matter. And I have also two clarification questions concerning your slides. On one of your slides, you gave figures about the gas reserves, and for Turkey it was 6.5 billion cubic meters. I don't think this is just. This is the slide, oil and gas exploration. I think it's much more, because John made reference to the Sakarya field, but it's not only the Sakarya field. I think that a couple of zeros have been missed there in the slide. Maybe it's a technical mistake, I don't know, but it says 6.5 BCM reserves, which I think is very low. And the second clarification question, on one of your slides, there was a reference whether Iran will have nuclear. Now, I think that Iran has nuclear, and I don't refer only to the Iranian nuclear program, which started as a debate in 2015 and then had its ups and downs, which is more on the political side because it's linked to weapons. But further to that, Iran has nuclear power plant. It has reactors in operation. So can you clarify this? Because there was a question mark whether Iran will have nuclear or not. Please.
Okay, thank you, Slavko. Concerning the gas storage, in the detailed study, there will be figures of gas storage for each country, including Egypt, etc. But it was not a major point, so that we did not include it. Thank you for the Turkish. Probably there is a mistake there. It's much higher, the potential gas reserves. And the final one, the question mark, was about nuclear Iran, that is nuclear bomb Iran. I mean, the question mark is if and when Iran will actually reveal its capacity as a nuclear power, not for power generation, which is already producing, but as a potential nuclear power in terms of weapons. Why we put Iran slide at the end is we wanted to show that still Iran has the capability to upend the whole East Mediterranean discussion. We may build some projections about East Med having the capability of producing, exporting electricity and all that. Now, all this could change very abruptly if Iran gets very dynamically into the picture, if the axis of resistance actually becomes even bigger, backed by nuclear capability of Iran as weapons. That was the question mark, which we, of course, explain in the study. Thank you.
It will depend very much also whether Trump is coming back, because he was in the center of the nuclear.
Thank you. My name is Yurdakul Yiğitküden from Turkey. I have a question to John regarding the development in Azerbaijan. As you correctly mentioned, smaller projects like Absheron are moving ahead, but larger ones like ACG Deep and Shah Deniz Phase 3 need more time for development. And would it be helpful, instead of having an MOU in the air, bankable contracts made with consortium there from European companies to buy this gas to be produced in the future from ACG, Deep, and Shah Deniz?
Yes, is the answer. Yeah, it is the answer. A revival of long-term contracts would definitely help. I think perhaps the most interesting element in all of the current Azerbaijani gas equation is two sort of connected developments. It looks as if the Azerbaijanis are at least investigating how they can become some kind of a hub. In other words, a freer trading of gas within Azerbaijan, which would enable them to bring in gas, whether it is from Russia, whether it is from Iran, or from Turkmenistan, and thus boost the volumes of gas within Azerbaijan that would enable them to cover any gaps in planned export levels. I think that's an interesting possibility because it fits with what Turkey has been doing in terms of talking to both Azerbaijan and Turkmenistan about getting gas from Turkmenistan through to Turkey and then perhaps onwards to Southern Europe. And perhaps the most important element of all of this is that since I have absolutely no doubt the Turks are very serious in what they've been proposing, the fact that the Turkmens themselves are engaged seems to indicate for the first time that the Turkmens are looking at modest volumes to begin with, rather than their great traditional approach of saying it more or less it has to be 30 BCM or nothing. So maybe there is some scope in that regard as well. But your bottom line suggestion of long-term contracts, I think, would be very helpful.
Thank you, John. As we are way surpassed the time, I will give the floor to Mr. Kostis Stambolis for the final remark, and thank you, everybody.
I think we had very useful discussion. Some points were noted. What I would like to say as a concluding remark for this presentation is that something which we explained in detail in the study is for the EastMed to be able to function as a potential energy source of substantial importance in terms of European supply and all that, it presupposes that countries develop in peace and cooperate very closely. Now, ourselves as an institute have put a lot of emphasis on that. For example, on April 25th, we organized successfully, I would say, in Istanbul, the first Greek-Turkish Energy Forum. And that was part of the agenda of bringing countries together to work on energy. And from this floor, I would like to extend my sincere thanks to our Turkish colleagues for their cooperation. I think it was a highlight of our activities of the last few months, the event in Istanbul. And it brought, apart from the knowledge and the contacts and all that, what came out of this is that there is a way forward for countries to cooperate. Of course, there are barriers. Of course, there are political obstacles and all that. But what we witnessed in this meeting which was very well attended, more than 100 people came there, is that there is a willingness on the part of the companies, the experts, academia, institutions to try and work together. And then if they work together, then they can unleash a lot more potential than it is evidenced, on the surface. That's what I wanted to say. Yeah.
Yes, with this key message, we conclude this session. Thank you, everybody. A big applause to our panelists.